This week we look at Genesis chapter 6 and on in our study, and this one of course is the flood. A tragic event, to be sure, and one that's raised a lot of questions in people's minds. How could God destroy all those human beings except for 8 of them? And the truth is, it is against his nature. We mustn't say that it was good or wonderful or anything that's positive. It was a tragic thing that he had to do. But we get an explanation there in the text that when God looked, all that human beings were doing was thinking about evil all the time. The thoughts of their minds were always evil. And God says, we have to start again. The demonstration of what sin does needs to begin again so that people can see, human beings can see, and all the onlooking universe. There is a reason why God does what he does. And it is not something that is benevolent or in any way to be covered up. We have to take this very seriously, and that God is serious about the fact he wants human beings to do what is right, to be kind and generous and loving, and to respond to him and his offer of salvation, because the people of Noah's time were not. And that's going to be the same, says Jesus, at the end. All these people who won't respond. In the end, God has to say, okay, I let you have your own way. Even though you know it's going to be destruction, I have to let you do it. Some quotes for this time. Robert Davis. In Genesis, seeing the world filled with violence, God decided to drown all mankind except Noah's family. But because that family carried the same genes as those who had drowned, violence continued unabated. I don't know whether necessarily it's in the genes, but it's in the fallen nature of humanity. So yes, after the flood, there is still sin. Noah and his family were not perfect. They were not sinless. And then there's another quote from Nicholas de Chamfort. The only thing that stops God from sending another flood is that the first one was useless. Well, I don't think it was useless, but it didn't prevent the spread of sin. It just delayed things for a certain time, as I said earlier. God promises not to send another flood, and yet the people after the flood, Tower of Babel, one of the reasons was to avoid being swept away by the flood. We'll build a tower all the way up to heaven. That way, if there's a flood, we'll be above it and all the rest of it. You can imagine what they were thinking. Still wanting to live life on their own terms, doing whatever they wanted, and still being evil. We'll get to that study later on in our examination of Genesis. How does God look? That's, I think, the fundamental question. Don't let's worry about how God got all those animals into the ark and how they survived and all the rest of it. We can read the account. I believe it's true, but how does God look? We have to look beyond all those events. We have to take it all together. We have to take all the things that God has done and put them together and say, how does God look? Not just one event, not just one incident. We have to look at everything that God does, which is why Jesus came, to show us God's true nature. Because if you just took the flood, you would probably imagine that God was vindictive, punitive, horrible, because he is the agent. We can't say he didn't do it. No, he sent that flood, and he knew what would happen. But he's doing it because people are refusing to listen, and he wants to save humanity. That's the strange thing. People have talked about God being like a surgeon, excising the part that is bad, the cancer. You could even see it that way, I suppose. The most important thing is, let's look for the good nature of God. Even when it doesn't seem that way, we need to take God and the experience of him as a whole and say, Lord, everything you do is for a good purpose. Let us trust in you.